1, 2, 3, yeah.
Boss in the streets, I'm a boss till I call. Boss in the beast, I'm a boss till I fall. I'm a boss on the beat, I'm a boss, spit it raw. I'm a boss, keep it G, and I'm walking the talk. Boss in the streets, I'm a boss.
Hey everyone, I'm Sean, and I am an indie iOS developer who works on an app called Sofa that helps you to be more intentional with your downtime. And usually I make videos about my process building Sofa, kind of like behind the scenes with all that stuff. But I also like to make videos about stuff that I'm interested in and just my general hobbies. And one of those hobbies is photography. And in this video, I want to talk about my experience with the Leica Q2, which I purchased a few months ago. And it's been a very interesting couple months with this camera, because I actually made a video about it before. I had rented it before, and you can watch that video. I'll have it linked. But it's just such an interesting camera, and a camera that I kind of like lusted after. I know many lust after. And now that I've had a couple months to use it and really use it heavily, like I had some travel over the past couple months and a lot of family time, and I am probably going to be selling this camera. And I wanted to make this video because it's actually kind of like for me, but I think other people will get, some benefit out of this. But I'm probably going to sell it, and I'm making this video so I can rewatch this in the future, right? for like, okay, remember when you're kind of feeling this desire to get this camera in the future, maybe watch this video and think about why it didn't work for you. And so I'm going to go through lots of different thoughts in this video, like the pros, the cons. Like, I have mixed feelings about this camera too. And I'll share a little bit of context about how I even kind of like ended up getting this camera and essentially like why I got it. But I'm also hoping that at the end of this video, I also feel some like personal clarity over the reasons why I most likely won't be keeping it. But who knows, maybe by the end of this video, after me talking about this for a long time, I'm gonna be like, you know what, I think I'm gonna keep it. But I'm pretty sure I'm not going to. So anyway, let's get into this. All right, so before we get into like the nitty gritty, I want to share a little bit of context just so you know where I'm coming from with this camera. So number one, I am not a professional photographer. I already said at the beginning, I am a software designer and developer. I make apps, and photography is a very like important hobby for me and fun hobby for me, but I don't get paid to do this or to do photography. No one does that. I obviously do take photos for my app, like for marketing purposes, and I use cameras for this YouTube channel. But again, I don't get paid professionally to do this. Most of the cameras I've used in the past have been Sony cameras. So Sony A7 IV, A7C, A7C2, A7R5. Lots of those. I've also used a lot of, I've used the Ricoh GRs a lot. Love those cameras, both the GR3 and the 3X. I recently got a Nikon Z6 III, which is what I'm filming on right now. And I have the 28mm lens, which that's what I'm filming with now, and then the 40mm. So I don't have a ton of experience with Nikon, but so far I'm liking it, but I'm still kind of like gathering my thoughts on that as I use it. And the way I use my camera is I bring the camera everywhere. Like literally everywhere. Like if I go food shopping, if I run errands, we go to dinner, family events, vacations, everything. Like anything you think of. I just love having a camera with me all the time. And I take a lot of pictures every day. All right, so let's get into why I bought this camera. And I should say I bought this camera used. I didn't buy it new. It's a Leica Q2, which is actually the old one. The Q3 is the new guy. But so I'll give like a little bit of backstory here, and I'm kind of skimming my notes as I do this too. So in March of 2024, I actually rented a Q2. And this is where, and I actually made a video about it, which I already mentioned, so you can go check that out. And I made a video of like my impressions from 1 week of using it. And, you know, the internet kind of, when you kind of see a bunch of stuff over and over, you're kind of like, all right, I got to check this thing out, right? So I rented it, and it was weird because like after renting for a week, I was like, I don't think this is for me. That's fine. You know, sent it back, no big deal, and went back to using my Sony cameras at the time. And then a few months later, we took a trip. This was like in July. We took a trip to the Outer Banks, and I brought my Sony a7R5 with multiple lenses. I think I had like 3 or 4 lenses. And I remember on that trip, I was like, it was a weird kind of like scenario because I had an amazing camera and amazing lenses that I had to choose from. And I kind of hated it. I was having like analysis paralysis of like, okay, well, what lens do I bring today, right? What lens do I bring for this thing or for that thing? And it's just like, it did not make it fun or enjoyable. And I took a lot of pictures on that trip and pictures that I enjoy quite a bit. But I remember the experience of just like, I'm on vacation and I have all this gear, and I felt like the gear was just weighing me down and was just not pleasant at all. Not pleasant to use. And even like the days where like, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna use this lens, but then like I would bring other lenses, and it's like, it was just too much, right? And I hated deciding what to use every day. And I also hated carrying it all around, to be honest with you. And that was even us like driving a lot, where I was just like, oh God, it's terrible. So anyway, so I remember on the trip is when I started thinking about the Q2 again, and I was like, oh, maybe a Q3, right? And it was really like the simplicity of it, right? The fact that it's literally a fixed lens camera, right? There's only one lens. It's attached. You can't take it off. The controls are really simple. The camera size is, I think this is a small camera. This is not a big camera. And I remember just like being on that trip and just being like, oh, I wish I just had like something simple, right? Because I just had too much stuff. And that is all self-imposed too. Like no one made me bring all that crap. But anyway, so we got back and I'm like, okay, maybe I'll rent a Q3, but I wanted to wait because like my brother was coming home to visit during the summer. And I wanted to use that in like more family situations. Whereas like the first time I rented it, like we didn't go anywhere. Like I was just kind of like bringing it around. So I feel like I really didn't get to push it as much. And so I rented to Q3 when my brother came home, and the camera just like clicked for me at that point. I was like, oh, like I like this a lot. And it was like a couple things. I brought it everywhere. I just like wore it everywhere. Like I just had, like the neck strap, I just kind of wore it everywhere. Didn't even like put it in a bag. And that like, I never really carried a camera that way before. Whereas before that, I had always either had the camera in my hand all the time or would just keep it in the bag until I needed it. And with the Q3, that was the first time I really like wore a camera and just had access to it at all times. And I would say like the design of this, the Q, and I know this is Q2, not the Q3, but like this just works to wear it. Like it's just very unassuming. I think it looks great. And it's not heavy by any stretch. Like I find even the strap that comes with it is very comfortable. Yeah, so it's just kind of interesting. But and that was like the first time I really like embraced a neck strap, where I was like, oh, this is actually kind of nice. And then, you know, the images that I got that week, and a lot of those are like family images, so I'm not going to show them here. I just love them. Like there was just something about them that I didn't see the first time around on the Q2. And I think that's really the context of like, I was really getting to use the camera a lot more and in many different situations than I had done before, right? And I guess that's like one of the downsides of renting is if you rent during a time where you don't have the opportunities to really like use a camera in multiple situations, it's, I don't know, it's hard to really like test it out at that point. So anyway, really enjoyed the Q3 at that point, and I was very sad to send it back after the battle, but you know, I had to. And then after that, it started, like I started looking at my Sony cameras differently. I was saying like, okay, what's bothering me about like these cameras? And it wasn't necessarily like the size of the body of the camera, it's really the lens, right? And big, heavy lenses, whether they're zooms or like, you know, high-end primes and stuff like that, they're just big and heavy, and I found that I do not enjoy, even though the image quality is incredible, for just like day-to-day lugging a camera around, I did not enjoy that. And I find that for me, the bigger lenses are what make the camera much heavier. And having like a, you know, just a camera body and like small primes is actually a much better balance for me with using stuff. So I started using my Sony cameras with like the smaller G primes, like the 40 millimeter or the 24 millimeter, that kind of stuff. And that was a much nicer experience, even though technically the image quality was worse than what I was using before, but it was just more pleasant to use, right? And I wouldn't put the camera in the bag, like I'm like wearing the camera, right? So then at this point, I was starting to think about like, okay, I like the smaller prime thing, right? That kind of makes things smaller and lighter and just more pleasant. But it didn't necessarily solve the like too much stuff problem and kind of analysis paralysis. And I was like, I just really need to simplify my gear, right? Too much stuff, and it was just hard to like, I don't even think it's like, oh, you're not a professional, so you don't need all this stuff. I think those arguments are really stupid. It's like, if you're into this stuff and you want it, it's fine. I think it really came down to like, when I have too many choices, it's not enjoyable. And like, I think, you know, you can see my computer back here. I have one computer, right? And if you think that's the thing I have it runs my entire business. I use it every day. I write code on it. I manage the admin stuff, like everything. And there's been times where I've thought like, oh, maybe I have two computers, right? Maybe I have like a super powerful desktop and then maybe like a really small MacBook Air to bring around. But then when I thought about it, I was like, well, how would I decide when to use one over the other, right? Because maybe I want to do heavy work, but I don't want to sit at the desk, right? And it's like, if I ever want to do heavy work, I'm always tied to the desk. And that's why I have a laptop, right? So I have a MacBook Pro that I can dock for the desk, but then I can kind of move around whenever I want, which is nice. And I like the idea of like, I don't have to decide which computer to use. When I need to use a computer, I just grab it. So no big deal. And so I was trying to bring that same thinking to the photography stuff, just the camera gear in general. And so, you know, I was using like a Ricoh GR. I had the Sony A7R5, and I thought that like, you know, if you think about the GR and then the Sony stuff, so the Sony's like the high-end professional camera, great results, all that stuff. And then the GRs are very small. They're kind of like your EDC camera. You can bring them literally everywhere. And I was like, okay, maybe the Q2 or Q3 could be a good, like, kind of amalgamation of those two things, where It is bigger than a GR and heavier than a GR, but not that much. I don't know. It's not like insane. But I have like the benefits of the GR and also the benefits of like a high-end camera, but total simplicity of like, I don't have to think about it. Just grab the camera and I go, right? And that simplicity was so alluring and so like, I was like, I wanted it and I kind of like needed that simplicity. So anyway, so I got rid of all my Sony gear and the Ricoh GR, and I got a used Q2, and the idea was, because a Q3, even a used one was still too expensive. So, but the idea was, okay, so for photography, I have my Q2, and then for any YouTube stuff, I was going to use the Osmo Pocket 3. And you probably saw some of those videos that I did with the Pocket 3, and Pocket 3 is amazing. But that was like the new setup. So it was going to be Osmo Pocket 3 for video and the Q2 for photo. And I loved that simplicity. And I actually still love that simplicity of like, this is my video camera and then this is my photography camera. Because even though there's two pieces of gear there, and you can say like, oh, isn't it simpler to just have one camera that can do all those things? And yeah, I mean, it kind of is. But I like the idea of, you know, this thing is dedicated for this, this other thing is dedicated for that. And I would say that for the most part, that setup, you know, not even for the most part, that setup works and did work. And after a couple months of doing that, I just have thoughts about like how that worked for me and how it didn't. And, you know, obviously I'm shooting on a Nikon right now, so, you know, things have changed in the video department here. But yeah, so anyway, this segment is like very long and rambly, but the idea is just to share how I ended up here. Like, why would I get rid of all this gear and try and simplify? And hopefully that makes sense, right? Because our brains are I feel like none of this is rational, right? Like there's, you know, I don't have a gas or gear acquisition syndrome when it comes to like computer stuff. I kind of know exactly what I need and I get it. But with camera gear, I definitely do have it, and that's fine. You know, that's life. But anyway, hopefully that this gives a little bit of context into how I ended up with the Q2, or at least my reasons why, even if there's a ton of flaws in that stuff. All right, so now that you have the backstory, the context, all that crap, I wanted to share some of the pros and cons and kind of just mixed thoughts that I have, you know, after using the Q2 for the past couple months. And again, the context here where I use this was we traveled to Toronto, Disney World, and we were in Jacksonville for a wedding. And lots of family and holiday events and stuff, and then I brought it with me, you know, every day, everywhere I went. So I feel like I really used this thing in a lot of different situations, and just want to share a couple thoughts. So let's get into the pros. So pro number one, the lens is insane, right? Like, it's like the way it renders is, yeah, just so unique. And even compared against like the Sony G Master Primes, like the 24mm, 35, 50, this is, I don't know. Maybe it's like the wide, fast lens is just very unique, but there's just like a depth to the images, like the transition between in and out of focus and stuff like that. And it's interesting because of my initial review, I said like, you know, I say a lot of dumb stuff, but like this was like pretty dumb, where I was like, yeah, I can't really see the difference between the Ricoh GR and the Q2. And in hindsight, that is just an obscenely stupid thing to say. But I think within that like context that I initially used it, there really wasn't a difference. But now that like I've used it in so many different lighting situations, and people situations and different things, like it's just, yeah, it's different. I can see the difference, right? There's a big difference. I get, like, people talk about micro contrast in lenses. I don't know anything about that, but maybe that's what it is. I don't know. Pro number 2, the colors out of this camera are really, really nice. And I know, like, I shoot in RAW anyway, so, you know, you can make RAW look almost like anything else, basically. And my post-processing skills are improving, but there's still a lot of room to go. But it is nice to just have what I think is a nicer starting point than my Sony cameras. And I like the colors that come out of this thing. And then I can push them in different ways and pull stuff back where I want and stuff. But I just think the colors are super nice. Pro number 3. This thing is extremely pleasant to walk around with. Like, so nice to walk around with. Like I said, the strap that comes with it, number one, the strap looks nice. Like, there is a Leica logo on it, but it's like branded into the leather. But the strap is really comfortable. And I would just have it like around my neck or, you know, sideways like this. And, you know, this is walking around Toronto for hours, Disney World for hours. No comfort issues at all. Just really, really pleasant to walk around with. And just like, you know, just kind of like bounces against you. And the times where I needed to like hold it in my hand, it was fine. But yeah, but just really, really nice. Pro number 4, I love the simplicity of the controls, right? So you have, on the lens itself, you have the aperture ring. So you can control stuff like this. Here we go. So you have the aperture ring where you can control stuff like your aperture, obviously. Then you have your shutter button here, and you can control ISO over here, but I tend to just keep it on auto ISO. And then, you know, most of the time I'm in aperture priority, and I'm just kind of controlling that. Maybe during the day I'm in like F8 or something. And then if I need slower shutter speeds, I'll manually dial that stuff in. But just the simplicity of that is very nice. And also it sounds really good too, and feels really good. I'll get to that in a second. But yeah, just the simplicity of just like, you kind of turn this thing on, you have your exposure compensation, which I use all the time. You have your shutter speed and your aperture, and like, that's kind of it. I never use the macro mode on this thing. It's not really, I don't know, I'm not really like taking shots like that. I sometimes will punch into manual focus if like a specific thing I'm trying to get in focus is maybe a little tricky with the autofocus, but most of the time I'm just using autofocus. But yeah, the simplicity of the controls is really nice. Pro number 5, the weather sealing and the build quality is great. And just the general, like, how tough this camera is. And if you think about it, like, it friggin' should be, right? But there's, I just love things that are just built really well, right? And like, if I bang it up a little bit, like, I don't have to worry about it. Like, you know, I love, I have like a bag obsession too, but like, Evergood's bags are amazing because they're super tough. I think they look great, and I don't have any issues with like throwing it on the floor or like stuffing it under an airplane seat or whatever. Like, I don't worry about, oh, is it gonna rip, or is the zipper gonna fail, anything like that. Like, I don't have to worry about it. And I feel the same way with this camera, where like, it's hefty, it's built of metal, and it just feels tough. And when we were walking around in Toronto the one night, it was raining, and like raining pretty good. And this thing got wet, and I know it's weather sealed, and I didn't worry about it. Like it was just nice to just be like, yeah, all right, it's getting wet, no big deal. I'm getting wet. But it was just nice to just have that peace of mind. And I just love how nice this thing is, just as like a physical object. And like I said, like the dials feel and sound really nice. The on-off switch here is really nice. I would say like some of the dials, like exposure compensation dial is, I think, still a little too flush, because like I feel like you have to be like weirdly precise with like, I tend to overshoot what I'm trying to hit for exposure comp, and then I have to like kind of dial it back a little bit. But for the most part, like I would say most of the buttons feel really good. Sometimes the buttons feel like I wish they were a little more, there was a little more like range of movement with the button and stuff like that. But for the most part, all the buttons feel great too. But this thing is just super tough, and I love that about it. Pro number 6 is I love the look of this camera. And there's gonna be people who hear that and just roll their eyes, but like, gang, there's nothing wrong with saying that. Like, this thing looks, I think, obviously that's subjective, I think this thing looks amazing. I think it looks really nice. And if you think back to what I said earlier, like during the summer I ran into Q3, like I wore the camera. Like, so the camera, the way I'm starting to carry the camera, or the way I am carrying a camera these days, is I literally am wearing the camera, right? It's like part of my wardrobe at this point. And in the same way that I choose the type of glasses I wear, the type of, clothes that I wear, the shoes I wear, a bag that I pick, like the way it looks factors into all of those decisions, right? Like, so if something is super nice and really well built and all that stuff, but I think it's ugly, the chances of me getting that thing are pretty low. So to me, if you are someone who like wears your camera, right, and it's not like just a professional tool for you, but this is something you bring with you all over the place, I don't think it's weird at all to factor in the looks of a camera and the fact that you're going to be wearing it, and well, how does it like fit into your style? And I think this looks good. I think it looks really good. It's more than looks really good. I think it's a beautiful camera, and like I said earlier, like it is kind of unassuming, where I feel like it just kind of blends in. People definitely notice it. I'll talk about that later. But I don't know, wearing, it's actually an interesting thing that I hadn't thought about before when I was buying a camera, like the wearability of a camera. Not just like functionally, but also like how does it look on you with, your overall style. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Okay, positive number 7. I love not having to decide what lens to use with it. I actually really love that. And just grabbing the camera and heading out the door is amazing. And that is the experience I was going for. Like, that is really the experience I was going for. And it took me a little while to get there. I definitely went through a phase where I wanted all this choice, but I've learned that I actually don't. I want almost like the only decision I want is, do I bring the camera? Like, that's it. Everything else can just be, pre-made for me. Yeah, it's just so nice to just like grab the camera and go out the door and not worry about, oh wait, should I bring the 40 or should I bring a zoom or whatever? It's like, don't worry about it, just grab the camera and go. Love that. Okay, so let's get into the cons of this camera, because there's quite a few. First con, and this is probably the main con for me, but this camera is slow. And when I say slow, I mean like it is slow to turn on. So I'm going to turn it on. And it's just like, that took at least 2 seconds to turn on. And it doesn't always happen. Sometimes it's on right away. Sometimes it's like thinking about turning on. And the general slowness of turning the camera on and off. Yeah, even turning it off can take a little bit, which is weird. Diving into menus, reviewing photos, like it's just slow. And I feel like I might be more sensitive to this because I work on software, and slow software is it just hurts. Like whenever I'm using software that is just slow, it hurts. Like I can feel it. And again, I'm probably a little more sensitive to it because that's what I do for a living. But I feel it with this camera. And again, that's not something I could have experienced within 1 week with it. And this is another downside of renting, is like, it's only a week, right? Like that's really not that much time. But after using this thing for a couple of months, it's slow. And, you know, I've seen some people online say like, oh, it's not slow, it's fast for me, all that kind of stuff. And I think that comes down to different people's expectations and like thresholds for what they deem slow versus fast. But this thing is slow. And like I said, sometimes it's fast, but it's not consistent. And I find myself missing just the immediacy and the speed of like the Sony camera that I had, was just like, I flick a button, it turns on, right? And things are just like instantly responsive. And again, I am not talking about autofocus. I'll talk about that later. I'm talking about just the general use of the camera, right? Like it is just, from a software perspective, it is a slow camera. And I find that to be quite painful. And the Q3, from what I've seen online, is either the same or worse. So I don't know. Con number 2. This is a weird one, but I have found that when I would hand the camera to a family member to take pictures of me, like say me and my wife, because I want like a nice picture with a nice camera, there was just way more explanation I had to give to get them to take a decent picture, which was like so weird. Whereas like I could hand them the Sony camera before any Sony camera and just be like, just point over there. Like not even tell them, just say like, oh, here's the button to take the picture, and then there you go, right? But like there's something about this camera, and maybe it was because it's like an older design or something, like people just struggled with this. And I would say people struggle to take nice pictures with it. So I was, that was like, and again, I don't do this that often to be like, oh, take a picture of me. But every now and then it's nice, right? Because most of the pictures I take are of other people. So it is nice to have every now and then to have a nice picture of me and my wife. But that isn't on our phone. But that was definitely an interesting one where I did not expect to hand this to people and then kind of just not know what to do. But what are you gonna do? Con number 3, the files definitely break down faster than the Sony files that I worked with in the past. And now even working with the Nikon files now, this isn't like, I knew this going into it, but like I really have to protect my highlights here. So like that exposure compensation is very important. And there's just way less room in the shadows to move as well. Like things just, especially the shadows like really break apart pretty quickly. But while it is a con, it's not like this huge con. Like I've kind of learned how to shoot around that and to kind of figure things out. But it is a con, you know, as part of this. Con number 4, this is not going to be a surprise, but the auto white balance is really bad. Like it's not even close. And even in like Lightroom, it's funny because like sometimes I'll use like, you know, to do a white balance correction. Sometimes I'll try auto in Lightroom, and sometimes auto does pretty good on like other cameras. Never good on the Leica. It's like it gets like super warm and it's really strange. But the auto white balance in here is not great, and many people have talked about this before. But again, not a huge deal. You can fix it in post. You can work around it. It's, you know, it is what it is, but it is a quirk of the camera to be aware of. Con number 5, the ergonomics. And the ergonomics is definitely like a mixed one because like this camera is very pleasant to just like carry and wear and bring around all day. But the times where I was like being more active taking photos and like holding it in my hand, the first couple days in Disney, like the way like my pinky's kind of sitting here, it was funny. Like I was like, oh, at the end of the day, like my pinky was like a little sore, and my hands definitely adjusted and got used to it. But like, again, there is a reason that they don't make cameras like this anymore, right? That they put like little grips on here, and that the aftermarket will have grips for these things, right? Because it's just more comfortable to hold. And while I think this looks better, ergonomics of this, if you're hand holding it, are not great. But I found that I adjusted to just like wearing the camera around my neck and just kind of like picking it up when I needed to and using two hands and stuff. But yeah, the times where I was being a little more active shooting with like, you know, and kind of carrying this in my hand, really, it's just not comfortable. You know, there's way more comfortable options out there. All right, so con number 6, and this is another one too, where I definitely needed time with this camera to really see this and to really appreciate this. And honestly, like I needed experience shooting with other cameras and other focal lengths to really see this. But this lens, you know, they say this lens is a 28, and it is a 28, but the way it shoots is more like a 26. And there's lots of examples of this online. Benj H has a video about it, and even like a thread about this. Samuel Street Life talks about this in his Q2 review, and he talks about why he was selling his. And I remember he actually mentioned something at the time that, you know, you hear something, but like I didn't fully appreciate or see it until I shot with this. But the lens I've used the most, or the focal length I've used the most over the past few years, has been 35 millimeters. And it's probably the first like focal length I like really fell in love with. And I love that it shows context, but like you still have a lot of emphasis on your subject, like whatever that is, whether it's a person or like a building or whatever. But you still get context. And I think that's something I've learned as a photographer. It's like, I love context in a photo, right? But up to a point. And love 35. And then I also tried 24 for a while and shooting on 24. And for photography, for me, 24 is just too wide. I feel like I lose too much emphasis on the subject, and things just feel too exaggerated. And I don't, in some situations, the look is really nice and really fun, but for the most part, I don't love it for photography. But for video, I love 24. I actually think 24 is like really, really nice and practical for it. And I have found that like 28 is actually this really nice middle ground for me, where sometimes I do want more space in 35, but I don't want to go all the way to 24. And 28's really nice. And I first found this with the GR, right? The Ricoh GR, because the field of view is the equivalent of a 28 on full frame. And when I started shooting with this, I was like, yeah, it's 28, it's great. And I was noticing that like, I was like, okay, this, like it always felt wider to me than the GR. And it actually always felt closer to the 24 millimeter that I shot on for Sony than it ever did to a 35. It actually never even felt close to a 35 at all. And I was just kind of like, okay, I guess maybe this is what a 28 really feels like. And I got the Nikon Z6 III here, and I have the 28 millimeter 2.8, like the little prime. And I've shot some family stuff with this, like just like, you know, holiday parties and family parties and stuff. And when reviewing the images, I'm like, this 28 feels different than the Leica 28. Like it was weird because like this 28, there was times where I'm like, this kind of feels like a 35. And then this, the Leica felt very wide angle and very exaggerated. And I just like, this is where like I just didn't have the experience to know why, like to understand like what the hell's going on here. I'm just like, they're both 28s. Why do they feel so different? But then like I rewatched the Samuel Streetlife video where he talks about this, where 28s that he's used in the past have actually felt more like 35. They don't have the exaggeration of a wide angle like a 24. But he was seeing like this felt exaggerated, like this felt closer to the 24. And then Benj Heich did a video where he showed that it actually shoots more like a 26. And it seems like that's due to focus breathing, right? So unless you're focused to infinity, if you're focused to infinity, it'll shoot closer to 28. But if you're kind of moving around there, it'll kind of zoom out. And I think that like this one might be between the slowness of the camera and that wide angle feel. Those might be the two things, are kind of like the two things that are making me want to sell this thing, is because, and I'll talk about that more later, but like the fact that I really enjoy 28, and now that I've been shooting 28 on the Nikon and it actually feels like a 35, it feels like a wide 35, and I'm like, yeah, that's perfect. Whereas the Leica feels like a slightly tighter 24, which I'm like, I like it, but I don't love it. And on a fixed lens camera, it's like, you better love this friggin' lens. So that's been an interesting thing that I've kind of learned and experienced over the past few months. And again, it's not something that is very obvious at first, because you go, oh, it's a 28mm lens. Why would it shoot that differently from other 28s? But I don't know, maybe that's common with a lot of lenses. Again, I'm learning, so let me know. All right, let's talk about some of my kind of mixed opinions on this. Because some things they're not necessarily good or bad, they're just kind of like opinions or observations. First one is, I don't love the shutter sound. I know it's a leaf shutter. Let's see if you can hear this. I don't love the shutter sound, but I do appreciate how quiet this is. And especially with like family stuff, you know, I think I love taking pictures of like candid moments, and not necessarily like posing people. And obviously people notice the camera, but once the camera's there for a little while, they kind of ignore it. But when they hear it, then people start posing, or they just act a little differently. So I love how quiet this is, and people don't really hear when I'm taking a picture. But I do love a chunkier, more tactile like feedback when taking a picture. And it's interesting because the Nikon Z6 III has the partially stacked sensor, and it's my first time shooting with like an electronic shutter where it's like actually usable. And there's parts that I love like, whoa, I can go completely silent and take pictures. Like, that's amazing. People won't notice and all that kind of stuff. But I really miss the like tactile feedback of like a shutter, or just like the button itself and all that stuff. So it's a pro and con, but yeah, I don't know. I have mixed opinions on like the leaf shutter, because I wish it was more chunky, but I like that it's quiet. So mixed reaction number 2 is, while wearing this all the time, especially when we were traveling, I have never gotten so many people say something to me about the camera. And again, like, I've walked around with cameras for the past couple years in many different places, and more people would just point at my camera and go, hey, that's a nice camera. And I would say, but here's my, I don't really know like what to feel about it. Part of me is very uncomfortable by that because I don't like to draw attention to myself. And I'm like, ooh, like, is this bad attention? Like, I don't know if I want people doing that. But also, like, I think a lot of people, and I had some people ask, oh, is that a film camera? Which I thought was interesting. I think people see it as like, oh, that's a different looking camera, right? Or that looks like an old camera. And they just thought it looked cool. And there's something to that, like I've been thinking about this. I don't know exactly how to, articulate it fully, but like the friendliness of a camera can be very disarming for people. And I think like this has that kind of sauce where it is a friendlier looking camera than to something that's like a more professional, modern mirrorless. And if people are more open and welcoming and just want to talk about stuff, like that's kind of cool. But also makes me like a little like, oh, Now, people notice when you have a camera. Even when I would shoot with the GR, people know you have it. Like people would say, oh, look at that little camera. So I'm not trying to be invisible here, but I don't necessarily know what to think about the, hey, nice camera piece, right? And I would say most people, when they would say, if someone asked what kind of camera is that, and I said, oh, it's a Leica, they had no idea what the hell it was, like for real. I think the people saying like, oh, that's you got to be careful of carrying Leicas around because they're expensive. I don't think most people even know what the hell they are. They've never even heard of Leica. The only person who said, hey, I like your Q2 was someone who was carrying a Leica M10. So like, yeah, I don't know. I think most people don't know what it is. They just think it looks like a cool old camera. Mixed number 3. The autofocus is really not bad. It's interesting because the autofocus is worse, obviously, than like a modern Sony or Nikon or whatever. But I tend to shoot in AFS single point in the center, and I just focus and recompose. And like, it's honestly pretty great, and it's pretty fast. It's not like, I'm not doing like subject tracking and stuff like that like you can on other cameras, but like, it's really not bad. And I've gotten more keepers than I think I thought, especially when I was traveling and like, we go to Disney a lot. We love Disney, and taking pictures at Disney is like one of my favorite things ever. And I was like, oh, this will be a really good test for just how chaotic Disney can be, right? There's just a lot of people, a lot of things going on. And I feel like I got tons of shots that I was like, oh, I was actually surprised I got that. Now, there was definitely moments where the autofocus just totally failed on me. Like, I'm thinking of this one where we went to the Christmas party, and so it's it's late coming out, and we're walking towards the exit, and like one of the cast members there was like, said something about the camera. I forget exactly what she said. So I went to take her picture, and I swore I had her in focus, and I didn't. Like just like totally missed. And I'm like, I have like the girl behind her in focus, and I feel bad because like she did this nice pose and all this stuff, and that's a situation where like the Sony camera would have nailed that. And like, maybe it's like a skills problem where like, once I gain more experience with a camera like this, I would have gotten it. But there was little moments where like with that, where with a modern autofocus system, I would have gotten the shot. And with this, I didn't. But for the most part, I would say the autofocus was good, or good enough for the shots that I needed. So, not bad. All right, who's still watching at this point? Good Lord. this video is probably like an hour long. Anyway, so am I gonna keep this thing, or am I gonna sell this thing? And it's definitely like, you know, you bounce between emotional reasons, logical reasons, all types of stuff. And I just like, this is just, photography is like the best hobby. I love it. And if I was super rich, I would just have all the cameras from all the brands. Like I don't have shade for any brand like with this stuff. Like these things are really fun. And I'm having fun like starting to learn more about the Nikon system and shooting with that and stuff. Like it's been fun to just like try things. And I think like, so I have some reasons to keep it, reasons to sell it. So some of the reasons to keep it are that I do love the images I get out of this thing. Like I really do. And the lens, like I said it earlier, like the lens is amazing. And even though it is wider than what I would prefer, the images are just, I think they're just gorgeous. And they just have a different level of depth to them than I have ever experienced. And I really, really love the images I've gotten here. The camera is really fun to use and really fun and enjoyable to just carry around all the time, like everywhere. I've had a lot of fun with this camera over the past couple months. And in a way, I was like joking to my wife, I'm like, I've kind of like bonded with this camera, which is like so stupid, but like that's how we are with stuff. Like we like attach all this emotion to things that aren't even alive. Like this thing is just a stupid camera. I've had like the same like emotions to like a t-shirt. I'm like, I can't get rid of that t-shirt because I love it. But yeah, this camera is just, there is something special about it. And I totally get the hype. I think the hype's deserved. Like people, this is a very unique camera, super fun. The images are amazing, all that stuff. So those are like some of my reasons to keep it. And most of those are emotional reasons, but you know. So some reasons to sell. Number one, I can use the money for other stuff, right? Like other camera gears, invest in the business in different ways. Like it's probably like, this is like the logical stuff where like, okay, even used, it's an expensive camera. Do I need to have that much money poured into a single piece of gear? Probably not, right? Like this is where like the rational side's starting to come in, where I'm like, yeah, I don't know. The other one is that the lens is too wide, right? And this is a big deal because, like I said, I love 35, but I'm really loving 28, and I actually think that 28 is, I'm preferring it more because it gives me more context than the 35, but not too much like a 24. But the fact that this lens doesn't really shoot like a 28 and feels more wide angle than other 28s that's kind of a big deal because I can't change the lens. And I have no issues with like fixed lens cameras at all, obviously. I shot with the Ricos for a while, this for a little while. I love the simplicity of that, right? The fact that like, I can't change the lens. Like I just have to use it. That's the way it is. But I think this might be too wide for how I prefer to shoot. And now that I'm experiencing the 28 on the Nikon system, I'm like, I actually like this quite a bit. So yeah, the lens. The other one is that, or the last one is that it's slow. And this is where, honestly, between the lens and the slowness, like slow software sucks. Like it is the worst. It's painful. It's frustrating. And a lot of times it's like, I've been using this camera. I'm like, man, like they went hard on the hardware. Like everything is just beautiful, sounds great, feels great. And then the software is just kind of like, it feels like a different organization did it. And I'm not even talking about the visual design of the software. That's one part of the software. I'm just talking about like the performance of it and how it feels to do stuff. It's just, everything just feels like you're kind of like walking through mud here. And it's just, I don't know. Those are the things that like kind of hurt every day when you use something. And it's like, if you've ever used a computer that is just slow, like just think about like, oh my God, this website's taking forever to load, or like, you know, I'm in this spreadsheet and like every time I'm moving to a different cell, it's like lagging. Like all those little things like hurt. And sometimes you really don't feel that until you use something that's fast. And once you've used something that's fast, like going backwards is kind of impossible. But yeah, those are kind of like my main reasons to sell. And I think the lens, yeah, the lens is too wide and it's too slow. So I am like 99% sure I'm going to sell this thing, and I have no regrets. Like, I'm really glad that I have had the opportunity to use this for the past couple months, because I've gotten some of my favorite images with this, especially in Disney. And I think it's a really unique camera. And I actually think like, let's say in the future, you know, they do another version of a Q where they actually like redesign the lens and improve it, where it doesn't have the focus breathing issue, where it actually does shoot more like a proper 28, and it is fast, like it's much snappier. I could see myself getting one because I love the simplicity of it and I love the looks of it. And if they're able to kind of figure that stuff out, that could be really nice. So yeah, so I'm pretty sure I'm going to sell it. So anyway, the Leica Q2 is definitely a very special camera. And if you're someone who uses one or has used one or wants one and all that stuff, and the things that I've talked about don't really matter to you, like, go use it. That's great. I think I've just learned that it's like almost for me, but like not quite. But I am glad that I've had the extended time to try it. So, but anyway, if you have any thoughts about all this stuff and you want to share, definitely put a comment below. I'd love to hear from you. But I want to thank you all for watching. I know this has been a very long video, but it's helped me, like, you know, you write a bunch of notes for stuff, and I've had this outline for a little while. Basically, like, as I've been using this, I've been like keeping notes. And sometimes like speaking that stuff out loud can help you digest it a little bit more. So I'm definitely glad that I did this. And even if no one watches this video and it's just for me to rewatch in the future whenever I get the itch for a Q at some point, I need to remember these details. But yeah, so anyway, if you are interested in checking out any of my work, my app, specifically Sofa, there's a link in the description here. If you want to see any of my photography stuff, I am on Instagram if you want to check that out. And I want to thank you all for watching this very long video. And have a good one. I'll see you next time. Bye.